Pariah Nexus has certainly shaken things up, but what do we need to do to adapt to the changing meta? Hello and welcome to Epic Flail 40k Tactics. My name's Luke, and this week I will be mostly talking about Pariah Nexus, in particular how the meta is evolving, so that by the end of this video you'll have a clear idea on how to maximise scoring in Pariah Nexus, and some things to think about if you're still struggling with list writing. Maybe you haven't changed your list much since Leviathan, and you're not sure what changes you want to make. I've got you. Let's get started. This is from StatCheck as of today, the 30th of July. And the reason why this is helpful is it helps to contextualise what I'm going to get into about Pariah Nexus and what's doing well. Currently, according to StatCheck, the top 10 factions, the factions with the highest win rate at the moment, are mostly factions that have quite a few key things in common. All of these factions are incredibly fast. They also have access to rules that enable them to get around the board quickly, redeploy or forward deploy abilities. Drukhari, as I've said, they have excellent speed and the ability to use stratagems to get back inside their transport, giving them a movement advantage over other factions. Sisters have miracle dice and tons of ways to boost their movement. Blood Angels have an abundance of jump infantry. Thousand Sons have movement shenanigans. World Eaters can scout for days. Chaos Demons, the whole army can deep strike and has access to uppy downy. Necrons, Hypercrypt, need I say any more, and Grey Knights as well. Baked into their army rule is this insane ability to go up and down. In fact, if you missed my army rule discussion, then I talked about this at great length. You can check that out here. I rated the Grey Knights army rule as one of the best army rules in the game, and it leans very nicely into what makes a good army in Pariah Nexus. These factions have mobility in common, and this tracks with the detachment win rates. Chaos Cult, Null Maiden Vigil, Real Space Raiders, and Penitent Host, all of those four have less than 40 games. These are the detachments that have the highest win rates at the moment, and you want to take the four that I mentioned there with a pinch of salt just because of the smaller number of games. The key takeaways here are that fast, mobile armies are a good place to be in Pariah Nexus. Why is that? One of the biggest changes from Leviathan is the difference in scoring. A lot of the secondary missions have been adjusted so that there's less points up for grabs for achieving them, and some of the missions are taken away, and this has resulted in the beginning in lesser amounts scored on average from Leviathan to Pariah. Now, that amount may change. What I'm sharing on the screen is already a month old and is from a really great series of articles that Warhammer have shared on the points and the types of missions on Pariah Nexus using the Tabletop Battles app, and I recommend that you have a look at Warhammer. There is some really great information on there. The level of insight is vast and way too much for me to cover in these short format videos. That and the fact that this is very much their content, and as much as I want to share it, they've done a great job piecing this together and they articulate the insights really well, so do check them out. So what does this all mean? On average, Pariah Nexus VPs is about 4 points less than Leviathan at the time that article was written, and it's changing and evolving, so that number might be a bit different now, and we will probably see that on average Pariah's Nexus scoring will increase over time, might even overtake Leviathan as the meta continues to evolve, but it's still useful to bear in mind when we're thinking about how we want to adjust our lists. So if victory points are now a little bit harder to achieve, then speed and mobility is going to be at a premium, and indeed is playing out in terms of the big winners in the meta. We're seeing a reduced effectiveness on balance of slow, unkillable units that we've seen in the past. Armies built around durable, heavy-hitting units could dominate the battlefield, but in Pariah Nexus this approach can be a bit of a liability. Confined spaces and intricate terrain often combat the advantages of those types of units and make them easy targets for a more mobile force. So this shift to a more MSU meta, multiple small units, breaking down your army into smaller, flexible squads, is of great benefit. You not only can increase your board presence, giving yourself more opportunity to score primary points, you give yourself redundancy, so if a unit gets caught out in the open by trying to go for an objective, you have a second unit in the wings ready to do something else next turn, instead of having to expend a bigger unit and then lose a bigger unit and suffer a heavier loss. If you've exposed a 10 model unit, then it's going to be just as easy to deal with than a 5 model unit if your opponent really wants it dead. And so, more often than not, having two smaller squads allows you to cover more ground and ultimately make it harder for you to be dealt with in one go. It means you've got to commit less. It gives us the opportunity to trade more favourably with our opponent, which I talked about in this video here. Thinking of speed, units that can move and navigate around terrain are invaluable. That movement 12 on jump infantry, even a raider just zipping around the board, can get in and out of cover so much more effectively than a unit that can only move 6 inches. That is a big deal if you're trying to score points. If you need to go to the corner of the board to get the kind of objectives that the Pariah Nexus is trying to steer you to be able to do, then that's going to help you to do it. That and the fact that the transports themselves can actually perform the actions a lot of the time as well. Not only help you to score points more, but can be even more powerful in road blocking your opponent, screening out your opponent and getting in the way, and ultimately preventing your opponent from getting on the scoreboard themselves. Something that is equally as important as scoring ourselves. Any units that give you access to that additional layer of maneuverability, bonus extra deployment options, so scout or infiltrate abilities, are fantastic in Pariah Nexus. World Eaters just love to get up close and personal and charging across the board, etc. But not only that, there's a secondary element to that plan as well as just punching your opponent in the head. You've got early board control, then blocking off key areas of the board and making it so your opponent really doesn't want to go anywhere near you, and that seriously limits their ability to score. So access to threatening units with infiltrate in Genestealer cults, for example, 10 Genestealers infiltrating up the board with a Patriarch is quite terrifying and doesn't actually have to charge anything to just be dominating the board. It can just sit there behind a ruin doing actions and just threaten to leap out and advance and charge. Or equally, you could split that unit up and have 2 small 5-man units of Genestealers or whatever small infiltrating unit you've got access to, and use that to deny scout moves from your opponent and prevent scoring. Access to things like that are fantastic and an important factor into why some of these factions are doing so well. Deep strike is another thing. The ability to be able to rapid ingress has never not been powerful, and deep striking units down to be able to get these objectives in difficult parts of the board are going to be crucial into racking up or threatening scores late in the game. If you've got units that can enter back into reserves, whether it's Gaunt's Ghosts or the Demon's abilities to jump back up into reserve, then that's going to be so useful for you to be able to, late in the game when you're running out of assets, in case they need to be deployed somewhere else to score a point, like setting up a Locus or the new deployed teleport homers, things like that can be potentially game changing and should absolutely be considered in your army. One particular change is the change to new orders. It's important to not underestimate the power of this change. It dramatically affects armies with command point generation abilities. Being able to spend a CP every turn and swap out a dud card that you've drawn for something that's going to score you points is a great change and something that should not be underestimated. My only struggle that I've found with this change is I often want the CP for something important in my turn, and I haven't had the luxury to be able to aggressively spend command point to get a new card, and so that's placed an even bigger value on the kind of units that would give you access to CP. Whether it's Leontus or extra unit of Grot, I really want those units in my army even more than I did before. Being able to fish for a better card is so important, and so if you've got access to anything like that in your army, if you were on the fence about them in Leviathan, I would seriously give them a second thought in your list design for Pariah Nexus. I want to discuss fixed versus tactical objectives as well. Ultimately, the data is telling us that people are taking tactical objectives more, and I don't need to go through each individual card and weigh up the merits of each to tell you the following. And the crux of it is that there's often one real easy card you can score as a fixed objective, but having 2 really good easy options is often a lot less simple. There are some outliers to this, of course. Green Tide, you can go for Cull the Horde and Assassinate, depending on their build, for some easier ways to guarantee points. But again, it can sometimes be a trap, because depending on how your army matches up into them, they could just decide to put all the characters somewhere else and attempt to deny you points and win by a smaller margin if they're being a bit more conservative, but deny you a great deal of points and prevent you from getting on the scoreboard. So we have to be careful about what objectives we're going for. Bring It Down is another great salient example that it's just not offering that bang for your buck that you'd normally get out of it, and so people often default to tactical objectives, which leads me back to look at the factions that are doing really well in terms of win rate in Pariah Nexus. These are all factions that can leverage fast mobile units that trade really well into other armies. A small unit of Adeptus Sororitas Dominions can punch up with the help of miracle dice, jump infantry darting around all over the place, fast, cheap, dedicated transports. Factions that can leverage multiple fast, efficient trading pieces to get on the scoreboard quickly and really maximize going for tactical mission objectives, rather than stretching themselves or being forced to make suboptimal plays with fixed objectives that are going to be a lot more difficult over the course of a game to consistently score. And so these are the things that we want to be thinking about when we're writing our lists. What units do we have access to that tick these boxes and allow us to really score well in Pariah Nexus? I've done my best in this video to condense down a bit of an overall Pariah Nexus to give a flavour of what's really doing well at the moment, so that when it comes to writing a list, if this is something you've been struggling with, you've got a really strong idea about what's doing well and can think about what you've got access to in your faction that you can start to include if you haven't been doing so already. And if you want even more insight in how you can maximise your scoring potential, then check out this video that I've made here. And don't forget to visit Epic Flail HQ for even more 40k content. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching, keep rolling those dice, and stay tuned for more.